Greetings of peace. This is Adeeb Shabazz and coming to you with yet another video for the week. And I hope you enjoyed last week's video. I'll be doing videos at least once a week. However, this particular topic, which is the Metaphysics of Gemini, that's what I'm going to call it, is going to be part of a monthly series on the Metaphysics of Astrology. And I'm going to be presenting these, in addition, at least once per month. We're going to start with the sign of Gemini because we are currently in the sign of Gemini, the first week of Gemini, although I'm a few days late. It's still going to be an on-time message. And I appreciate you tuning in. A lot of people, they'll say to me, I'm not really into astrology. I really don't believe astrology. And I don't really get into that type of stuff. And that's fine. I'm going to say the same thing, folks, that I said about the law of attraction. It doesn't matter whether you're into it or not. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. It works. We deal with the sciences here. We deal with sciences that are not often dealt with, and the science of astrology is one of them. And I would suggest to 99% of you who say that you go and actually investigate, because most people who say that they don't believe this or they're not into it have not really studied astrology, just like they haven't studied the law of attraction. And I suggest before you make a judgment, you get qualified by actually reading up on it and asking some questions of some qualified people. Most people look at things like astrology, for example, and we're not talking astrology, folks. We're not talking astrology at all. That's a cheap way, kind of like a fortune teller with a crystal ball trying to tell the future. Astrology is not a way to predict the future at all. What astrology is a science in the way that the planetary arrangements and the arrangements of stars actually affect people, affect energies on the planet, affect energies in the universe, in your galaxy, affect the way things function energy-wise in your environment. That is what astrology is. Now, you always have free will. So I can't predict to you what a Gemini will do any more than I can predict to you what any other sign will do. We can't predict that. That's not what astrology is. And anybody who says that they can, that's probably the person that you need to dismiss, because that's probably why you don't believe in astrology, because you've been listening to quacks. So anything that you've read in the local newspaper or online, in some type of horoscope or so forth, that you can discard. We're talking about the science of astrology here. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's get into what we're talking about in the Metaphysics of Gemini. Now, we're going to be talking about how each sign actually works, what the characteristics of those signs are, a little bit of the history behind how the signs came about, and so forth. And it's going to be very brief. We're going to go more detail with it in the blog, so stay tuned. I'm going to give you the blog address, so get a paper and pencil, or get your iPod or iPad or a PDA or your electronic device, your smartphone, whatever you put it in, and make sure that you get the website address for the blog. So be prepared. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the Greek mythology behind it, not because I'm teaching mythology here, but because the mythology that comes behind the sign of Gemini actually has a bit to do with the science behind it, and it'll make sense to you. Now, there were half-brothers in this myth. The half-brothers are named Castor and Pollux, and these were the two brothers that were the sign of Gemini. They actually represent the two brightest stars in the constellation in the sky called Gemini. Now, these two, as I said, are styled as half-brothers. Now, they are twins, but they are not twins of each other. They actually each have twin sisters. So it's very interesting. So you have two half-brothers that are actually twins, but not twins of each other. They have twin sisters. This is significant because Gemini actually has a way in dealing with being able to relate to and understand the masculine and the feminine side of things, or the positive polarity and negative polarity of things. Let me go ahead and clarify polarity for those of you who are not familiar with it. Polarity, when I talk about positive and negative, and even when I talk about the terms of masculine and feminine, are not about girl, boy, or good, bad. Positive relates to masculine, negative relates to feminine. These are not necessarily sexual connotations, but they are symbolic of the polarity charge. What is polarity? Positive forces actually show their power by exerting outward force, whereas negative or female energies show their power by inward force and receptive force. Do not be fooled that masculine or positive polarity is greater than negative polarity. Don't be fooled by that. Don't confuse it by putting traditional Western value in your head when we're dealing with this, because positive polarity is no stronger than negative polarity, and masculine polarity is no more stronger than feminine polarity. Understand that. It's very important for you to get that and understand what we're talking about with that. So Gemini is a positive polarity. That's why the two male half-brothers are represented, although they do have female twins, which means that they are just the masculine part of the equation, who relate well to their close relatives, who are the twins, their particular twins. So understand that that's where the polarity is at. And I just want to briefly, even though this is not about Gemini, explain that negative polarity or feminine polarity, when we're speaking about astrology, is powerful, because if you have ever seen an article, or studied an article I should say, about a black hole, or you've listened to or read a dissertation about it, or if you have listened to or watched a documentary about it, you'll understand a black hole is very powerful. That is negative polarity. So don't be fooled that positive polarity is anything more strong than negative polarity, because a black hole is one of the most powerful things in the universe. Positive and negative have their strengths, and they're very equal, and they're very much equally important. But we'll get to that in another day when we're dealing with negative polarity. Right now we're dealing with the masculine sign Gemini. And Gemini is very outgoing, out forward. So you have somebody who is really going to show their power and force by exuding their qualities rather than drawing in. Getting back to this mythology, the duality that is represented in the twins is also symbolically represented in the Genesis story of the tree of the garden, the tree in the Garden of Eden, that's supposed to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That is somewhat related to the sign of Gemini and that duality, because Gemini shows the duality of being able to say, well, if there is one side of a thing, then there is the other side of a thing. And Gemini is that inquisitive one who will investigate and actually look for the other sides of things. Now, Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini, and also the Greek god Mercury is symbolic of Gemini also. For those of you who know anything about Greek mythology, the god Mercury has wings on his feet, and he speeds around very quickly. And he is a messenger. He brings messages. So note that these things are very characteristic of Gemini. Gemini is a communicator, thus the messenger. He's a communicator. He or she is a communicator. Gemini communicates. Gemini expresses. Gemini is very verbally elite. And they very much make good spokespersons, good public speakers, good teachers, good lawyers, good writers, good authors, and thus you have me standing before you as a public speaker, a writer, an author, a journalist, and I didn't reach those actual stations in life right away, but that is what I do best. And that's another thing. Finding out what you do best is very important, and if you don't know the science of astrology, you may waste a lot of time, like I did, although I don't consider anything a waste. It's just a long way around getting to a point. But you may spend a lot of time actually getting to the point of expressing yourself where you should be at. And that's the whole purpose of going with this series, is getting people to understand that you want to actually be in your field when it comes to your career, and as well as being on the right page when it comes down to relationships. You really want to know who you fit with. So briefly, I'm going to go over that. Like I said, careers that are good for a Gemini is something like a teacher, a lawyer, a public speaker, an author, a journalist, even a salesperson. These are areas where Gemini can actually excel, because anything that involves communication, Gemini does excel at. Gemini is very quick thinking on his or her feet, and actually will be able to fluidly move in situations where there's multitasking involved. Negatives that Geminis have to be concerned about is that their sharp intellect and their quick talking can actually insult people or actually be sharp and hurt people if they're not careful. Luckily, the first week in Gemini, for me, since today is my actual anniversary of my physical birth, May 27th, the first week of Gemini is known as the week of freedom, and we tend to be diplomats. So we tend to be very diplomatic. We are not as sharp with our tongue as the other 2 weeks of Gemini. Henry Kissinger was born also on May 27th, and he is the most famous living diplomat alive still. He was a legend in the 20th century, won a Nobel Peace Prize, and is known for his diplomacy. We're also known to be very eclectic. Andre 3000 was also born on this day. Lisa Left Eye Lopez was also born on this day. So we have a great deal of, creativity, ingenuity, and eccentricness in us. And a Gemini is going to be eccentric anyway. Speaking of being eccentric, you have to understand that you got to match up with the right person. So if you happen to be a Gemini, pick the right mate for you. Now, just because they're the right sign doesn't mean they're the right mate. But if you meet somebody and they're interesting to you and they're into you and you're into them and there's love there, well, now you have to go ahead and see, does it have what it takes to stand the test of time? Are they the right astrological match? Gemini is an air sign. There are 4 types of signs: air, fire, water, and earth. And Gemini is an air sign. And an air sign is dealing with the intellect, which of course fits with what I was saying before, that the intellect is very swift with a Gemini. Now, we're very verbally elite. We like to communicate. We don't do well with those who do not like to communicate or communicate in a non-verbal manner. So you have to understand what you're dealing with when you're getting into a relationship. You don't want to get with somebody who does not communicate verbally, because it becomes very frustrating to Gemini. So, for example, Gemini and Cancer make a very poor couple, because Gemini likes to speak about things and be very verbal about what he or she feels, whereas Cancer may be verbal about everything else except their emotions, except their feelings. They live in the emotions. They're a water sign. They live in the emotions. So that makes a very poor match. Gemini and Scorpio also make a very poor match, mainly because, again, you have a water sign dealing with this air sign, and it causes a lot of explosions. Scorpio is very sharp with their emotion, but they are still emotionally based. They're not shy with it at all, but they're very emotionally based, and that can cause lots of eruptions and storms when it comes down to relationships. Good relationships, on the other hand, that are harmonious, happen to be Aries, which is a fire sign, by the way, Leo, which is another fire sign, and Gemini. Those two work extremely well together, and, of course, a couple of air signs. Gemini and Aquarius work extremely well together. They can exchange ideas all day long. There might be a bit of instability there, and y'all may blow like the wind, but there is an interest there that will never die. When you're dealing with Gemini and Libra, there tend to be a lot of tennis matches going on back and forth. However, it will not be boring, put it that way. And you will never grow tired of communicating with a Libra. Speaking of another, Gemini relationships are the most exciting relationships you'll find, but they tend to burn out and fizzle because there's just too much in the intellect just roaming around. So you have to really be careful with the Gemini relationships, but they are extremely, extremely fulfilling in the time that you're in them. And when it comes down to Gemini and Taurus, that is a very poor match as well. Dealing with the fixed signs, you have to be very careful. Taurus is one of those fixed signs that is very, very stifling to a Gemini. So you have to be careful and not get into too much with the Tauruses when it comes down to interpersonal, intimate relationships. And that's all I can get into right now in this short amount of time. However, there's a lot more that can be said about the metaphysics of Gemini. I just wanted to give you a brief taste of what we were talking about when it comes down to the metaphysics of Gemini. I'm not going to end it here, but I'm going to end the video in a minute. I want to be able to give you more information, and it will be available on the blog. Just look below, somewhere below me, and you'll see the link, which is godblog.freedompathradio.com. That's godblog.freedompathradio.com. And if you go there, you'll be able to continue this discussion as I'll write more about this subject, and we can actually have question and answer. So go to godblog.freedompathradio.com. We'll continue it there throughout the sign of Gemini, and we'll take it from there. I thank you very much for your time, and tune in soon as we'll have another broadcast. Make sure you visit the blog, like I said, and I look forward to your comments and questions. So please make sure you bring them, because we'll be looking for them, and I appreciate you very much. I'm going to leave you with the greetings of peace. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, namaste,